Do you see that? What is that? How did this thing survive in here for so long? This jar is a world in and of itself, sealed off from the rest of nature. The water, plants, algae, and tiny creatures inside have survived for around 500 days. That's right, for over 1 year, this jar has sat on a shelf under an artificial light as the creatures inside feed, breed, and die, but not before new generations are born. The plants utilize the light from the lamp to produce both oxygen and food for the creatures inside, food in the form of glucose, cellulose, and the like. And the small animals, well, they make carbon dioxide as a waste product for the plants to use. This jar is actually one of the most famous jars on YouTube. That's a weird thing to say, but see, a few months ago, I posted a video where I opened this jar after it was sealed for an entire year. So technically it has been opened at least once in its creation. And that video has been viewed by over 200,000 people, which is small potatoes on YouTube, I understand, but it's a big deal for me. And the changes since that video, only a few months ago, has been pretty astounding. The water remains remarkably clear, and the majority of the algae, along with a surviving plant whose roots you can see in this shot here, has sort of coalesced into one big photosynthetic blob. When we look closer, that's when more of the macro and micro life in this jar really comes into view. One of the most common creatures inside is the copepod. Copepods come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, but most of them in this jar look like this. They're part of a broader category of organisms known as plankton. That's a word we hear sometimes, and it's also a SpongeBob character. But plankton refers to organisms that float around but can't really fight against a current. So a copepod is a zooplankton, and they feed primarily on other smaller plankton, algae, and the like. They're filter feeders, but they need to filter a ton of water to meet their nutritional needs. In fact, a single copepod can cycle through a volume of water that is equivalent to 1 million times their own body's volume in a single day. A human filtering 1 million times their own body's volume in a single day would be the equivalent of like 25 Olympic-sized swimming pools. And they do all that just to get enough food to survive. Evidently, copepods, despite this isolation in this jar, are doing just fine. Check this out. What is this that we're looking at? I'm not going to tell you yet. Leave a guess down below in the comment section, and we'll come back to this later. As of a few months ago, this jar was home to some ostracods. You can see them in this shot right here. But unfortunately, I haven't been able to find any this time around. There were a lot before. So I don't know what would have changed in a few months that would have killed an otherwise hardy and resilient organism. The same is true for the tubifex worm, aka bogey worms. They were a favorite in that other previous video. You can see them here dancing, but I didn't spot any this time around. Those are two species that I didn't expect to die off at this point. But there's always a chance that they could reemerge. And speaking of resilient organisms, as I looked through the jar, I started to get concerned. See, this jar was home to a bladder snail. And I don't know where... Oh, never mind. There it is. Hiding in a blob of algae. The bladder snail spends its days snailing through the algae and climbing the glass. This shot is sort of cloudy from something brown on the glass, and it might look like it's, I don't know, some sort of gunk. But if we zoom way in, we can see that it's not just blobs. It's actually these neat little shapes called diatoms. Diatoms are a tiny form of algae, and they use silica, which is like a major component of sand and glass and other things, that is dissolved in the water to create their body's structure. These diatoms are a major food source for the snail, And they also are probably the reason why the copepods hang out so close to the glass in an effort to try and filter some of them through their digestive system. And as for the snail, well, bladder snails are capable of asexual reproduction. So far, it doesn't look like that's happened. Unless something changes, this snail, along with this larger one that I later found in this jar, may be the last of their kind. And when they die, if they haven't reproduced, if they haven't laid eggs that are able to hatch and grow up into snails, they may be the last of their kind in this jar. And yeah, that's poop that just fell off of that snail's shell. Earlier, I showed you something and I said I wouldn't tell you what it was until later in the video. I made you guess what it was. It is snail poop. But if we zoom in, we can actually see a plethora of small, nearly microscopic creatures hanging out around this waste. I don't know if they're feeding on it or if they were in the waste itself, but it's pretty amazing. By the way, do you hear this song? It's one of those free songs in YouTube's audio library, but in my opinion is quite excellent and matches this type of content very well. But there's more to this song, at least for me. See, a few years ago, while I was hanging out on YouTube watching videos, I was introduced to this obscure hobby of closed ecosystems. It was from a YouTube video that was recommended to me from a channel called Jartopia. And using only video and text on the screen and a song, these videos told a story of his closed terrariums that he had kept going for a long time. One of them, in fact, I think the very first video I watched was a closed terrarium that had survived at that point for 12 years. And instantly, I was mesmerized. And though it took me a few years to start this channel of my own, both that video and the songs that he used in a select few of his videos have remained in the back of my mind ever since. His channel is still up. He no longer posts videos, and I've heard some sad and unfortunate rumors as to why that's the case, but of course I have no way of verifying these rumors. He is certainly missed here on YouTube, but his videos continue to have an impact on myself and I imagine others as well. And I can only hope that these videos have a similar impact on viewers like you. Do you see that? Okay, real quick, before we wrap this video up, this was the strangest discovery I made. A creature I had not identified in this jar, or any of my aquatic jars for that matter, up to this point. This creature is tiny. I'm talking maybe 1 millimeter in length, barely visible with the naked eye. And I was genuinely stumped as to its identity. Based on its appearance and how it was seeming to crawl, my first guess was an insect, some sort of fly larva maybe. But the odds of that, I mean a fly larva somehow surviving for this length of time, they don't stay in that stage for this long. And I also doubted that an egg could have survived for that long either. It does bear some resemblance to an amphipod or a scud, a creature seen in this shot. This is from a different jar. But no, they don't really crawl in that matter. So I took the question to Reddit, and actually, someone gave me the surprising guess of a copepod. I was ready to shoot down the guess. We know what copepods look like, right? We already covered that in this video. But there are thousands of different species. In fact, 2,800 just of the freshwater copepod species. And after looking, I'm actually fairly certain that this is actually a copepod. And if it's alive, it's almost certainly not the only one of its kind in this jar. So that's pretty cool. These jars never cease to amaze me and always leave me asking more questions than I had to begin with. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this update on this jar. I'll see you around and take care.